Get the cream, precious metals or the crypto things. Your bars are light like the one that's on a Smith machine. But my Maxwell and I ain't speaking about the pretty.
Welcome to 3CountCommentaries. Today we're going to be talking about the Broken Skull Sessions of Lita, Stone Cold Lita. And as usual, I like to take a general idea from these episodes instead of doing a straight review. Just get a general idea and extrapolate from it. So from the one thing that I noticed through watching this episode and listening to Litas Story is that she's fiercely independent, meaning that she likes to do things her own way. And in some ways, that is the reason why she was a success, because she chose to go her own route. And oftentimes she was so independent, she chose to do things sort of at the spur of the moment, where it was not really a plan as much as it was a point and shoot sort of lifestyle. She wanted to do something, she got up and went and did it. And along the way, she found different people to help her, or she was crafty enough, or she was wily enough to get what she needed. And the story, if you don't really know it, and I don't really know it, it does hit a couple of snags as we go forward. And where you kind of have to be like, how did Lita get out of that situation? But, you know, let's go through it. So she talks at first about, you know, Saudi Arabia, how great it was to be the first woman on the Billboard in Saudi Arabia and that sort of stuff. That's what they talk about at first, after they talk about her neck injury, and how she feels or whatever. Then we learn where she gets this independent streak from. And she was pretty much a loner because her dad moved her around a lot. She never really had an opportunity to make really solid friends. She was constantly making friends and then having to move. It's almost like an army brat type of lifestyle, but her dad wasn't really in the army. And she didn't really watch wrestling growing up, but she had a boyfriend who liked wrestling. And he was the kind of person who would say, you know, leave me alone. I'm watching wrestling. Don't come in here. Don't mess with me. And occasionally she kind of got into it over time as, you know, she started watching it with him. So that's kind of how she got into wrestling. And because her boyfriend was in a band, she also liked, I guess, punk rock music or whatever this is. And he was going on tour, you know, with a band for a month, and she figured she needed something to do with herself. She decided to just go to Mexico and become a pro wrestler in Mexico because she was a huge fan of Rey Mysterio, and Rey Mysterio is Mexican. Therefore, she saw, hey, I need to move from Florida to Mexico, and therefore that's what she did. And she went down to Mexico, and this is when we get the snag, where she says that she bought a ticket to a Lucha Libre show. She didn't know the language. She didn't really know anything about Mexico. She didn't know where to find a school. She didn't know anything, but she did find a show. And she paid $10 to get into the show. And she was the only white girl there. I know for years I thought Lita was Hispanic. She's another one of those Scott Hall situations where I swore up and down Lita was Hispanic. But she was the only white girl there. And she says that, you know, police officers, la policia, are trying to look after her. And they're saying, like, what are you doing here by yourself? Like, what is going on here? And she's like, oh, no, I'm just watching the show. And every week she would come back. But this is where you kind of get jammed up. Because it's like, okay, she doesn't really know anybody. And she talks about basically getting a police escort to these shows. And she kind of explains that she kind of mingled in with some foreign exchange students while she was down there. And these were journalists. So she started hanging out with them. And she was living in an apartment complex with them. And that's how she, you know, spent all of her time in Mexico. And I was just kind of like, you know, I was rubbing my chin quite a bit. I was like, wait a minute. You just moved to Mexico, and it just so happened to be some foreign exchange students down there for you to hang out with. So you just kind of hung out with them. But it kind of goes along with her point and shoot lifestyle where, you know, she was interested in a thing, and then she just jumps up and goes and does it if she wants to, you know. So she learns Lucha Libre in Mexico. Then she goes to Maryland for Maryland Championship Wrestling. And she says basically she did it on a whim, that she knew some people through asking some questions. She found some people there, and she was willing to do anything. She was willing to be a valet. She wanted to wrestle. She, you know, helped put together the ring. And through, you know, the hustle of getting in the building, even through putting the ring together, she would talk to people. And this is how she started getting booked, and she started traveling with all these other wrestlers and asking them, hey, where are you going to get booked? And then she would follow them. Or, if she even offered to drive them there sometimes. So she snuck in here that for extra money she was dancing, which means she was stripping. But that kind of explains it all, but they don't linger on Lita's quote-unquote dancing career. They don't, but that kind of explains how she was able to take care of herself when she was basically a podunk wrestler who wasn't really making anything and nobody really knew. And she was basically just following other podunk wrestlers around getting booked. It kind of makes sense. And then she says that when it comes to ECW, she was in ECW for a short amount of time. A lot of people didn't know this. But she said she just showed up and she heard that ECW had tryouts before every show. So she showed up again, offered to put together the ring. After they did that, she was allowed to do some workouts in the ring. And from there, Tommy Dreamer had seen her. And Tommy Dreamer, and since Lita had come with another woman, Tommy Dreamer says, hey, you can do a 5-minute match with this lady, with whoever she came with. They could do a 5-minute match on the show. And Paul Heyman kind of liked her. And, she got labeled Miss Congeniality, which was a short-lived valet thing that she did in ECW. Now, she says during this time, she also was in the Funkin Dojo. They kept getting the Funkin Dojo and the Funkin Conservatory mixed up because the Funkin Dojo is what it was called when Dory Funk was working with WWF. And she said she was in that class. Now, when I did my review of the Funkin Dojo, and I did that for the developmental series, I don't remember seeing Lita's name in it, and I don't remember seeing Lita in any of the pictures. That doesn't mean she wasn't there. It just means I don't remember seeing her. But she said she was in ECW and she was in the Funkin Dojo at around the same time. And this was when the WWF had this relationship with Dory Funk Jr. And then she moved down to North Carolina, I believe she said she did, when Funk was separated from the WWF. So this would have been about 2001 or something like that. She was still in ECW at the time, but she was basically in a position where, hey, I want to go do this. I want to go learn and get better at wrestling. I want to learn more. Even though she had been trained already, she wanted to learn more, so she moved on. So Dory Funk sent a tape of her to WWF, and that's how she was able to get the job in the WWF with S.A. Rios. But she also was up for a WCW gig. But she says during this time, Terry Taylor, who was working in, I think he was working in talent relations in WCW at the time, had told her that the company was essentially going out of business. So it was better for her to go to WWF. And Jim Ross saw her, liked her tape, and brought her in. And she debuted in 2000 with S.A. Rios. And her gimmick was essentially whatever he could do, she could also do. And because she was female doing the stuff, and nobody in the United States had really been exposed to that too much outside of the Japanese female wrestlers, and there weren't that many of them in the United States at the time, she was able to kind of really get over, and she was even ended up overshadowing him. Now, apparently, she and the Hardys had worked together on the independents in North Carolina when she was, because part of her independent run was Memphis, Nashville, and North Carolina, and some other places. So apparently, she met the Hardys there, and her and the Hardys were already friends. They were already working together, and they were already traveling together, rather. And then they were just basically put together by Michael Hayes as a group. And she talked about how, she had to evolve her look, how her look kept changing, and how she started wearing like the thong with the visible thong, which became like a trademark for her. She started doing that on purpose, and people thought she wasn't, because these guys are old fogies like Michael Hayes. They don't know that she's showing her underwear on purpose, and it of course makes her pretty popular. So then she starts talking about working with the guys at intergender wrestling, and that it added to her unique presentation because she was able to, the guys were selling her doing lucha libre stuff to them, like flying hurricanranas and moonsaults, and the guys would actually take a bump. She was talking about how every time she would jump off one of the guys, she would always pat him on the back or pat him on the stomach to say, thank you for at least taking a bump for me, which I thought was very nice. And she says that, the demographics that WWE at the time, they already had the male demographic. They wanted to move more towards women, which is why she, her role kind of expanded as time went on. Her role expanded. And she says that, she felt like, the Hardys and Agent Christian and all these guys started opening up the tag team division and proving to people that WWF can have stars that are in tag teams. So they talked about her winning the title from Stephanie McMahon in 2000. If I remember correctly, this is actually the first ever women's main event of Monday Night Raw. It was Lita and Stephanie, but it had a lot of interference from The Rock and Triple H and a lot of other stuff. So basically, while she was in WWF, her mentor was Dr. Tom Pritchard, who would tell her what the plans was and give her feedback on what she was doing. And she says that, for her, it was all about staying out of the way. In this moment, it wasn't about her, even though she was in the match and Stephanie was her opponent. She wanted to just basically stay out of the way because it was Rock was there, Triple H is there, Kurt Angle is there. She wants the top guys to get the spotlight. So she kind of wins the belt and get the hell out of there. So her and Steve were talking about how she could have taken a few seconds to sort of soak in the win. But Steve kind of, said that she was right to not take up too much space. But at the same time, she should have taken up a little bit more space. And she talked about how her psychology had to change through her matches. That at certain points, she was only known for doing high spots, what they call exclamation points. That's what she said. That basically throughout, she got over just being able to do one or two moves to a guy. A moonsault here, a hurricanrana there, a splash here, a splash there. Now she's got to work a whole match. And now she's got to actually learn how to work a whole match and not relying on her trademark moves and building up stories in order to lead to some version of a longevity on her career. And so basically becoming the women's champion gave her the opportunity to learn how to actually wrestle. So I thought that was very good. So she talked about dating Matt Hardy, and she basically said how it was pretty easy because they was together already all the time. And they showed clips of her match with Chyna, which I actually forgot existed. And then as we was looking at this, I was like, have I ever seen this whole match in full? In clips, it looked like it was a pretty good match, but that was clips. I wouldn't trust clips. But she talked about this was Chyna's last match. It was Judgment Day 2001. And her and Chyna were friends. And she says that, hey, Chyna, she had a bad reputation of not being able to work. But she says that Chyna knew how to work with people that she liked. And that she was rough with people that she didn't like. Which sounds a lot like Ultimate Warrior and Andre the Giant. And a lot of other people who are, Chyna is not always spoken of in the same context with. But, she talked about how in this match, she and Chyna both wanted to expand their repertoires a little bit. So you see them using submission holds and different things like that. And say neither one of us was really known for submission holds, but we figure, hey, whatever. And then she also said that she felt like she and Chyna could have better matches, but she felt that they would get opportunities to do that more in the future. So they held back a lot, not knowing that this was going to be Chyna's last match. So that was very cool. Then she spoke about her neck injury that she was doing the TV show Dark Angel. And there was a stunt where she was supposed to jump onto the female. And they had tested it a couple of times. And then on, time of the actual shoot, she jumped up on the person and the woman's knees buckled rather. And she landed on her head. And she said that she felt shockwaves throughout her entire body. And her and Steve have this. Steve, when you talk about neck injuries, he gets kind of emotional. Like he really takes neck injuries personally. So, and she was pretty upset because she was explaining how the cast and the producers and everything didn't really understand how hurt she was. And they kind of minimized it. They said she had a stinger, even though her left arm was essentially dead. And she said she rested for 5 minutes, which is what they halted production for 5 minutes so she could take a break. And she said she could move her fingers and toes, but she couldn't get up. And she explained to them, hey, if you can get me on my feet, I can walk, And she said she was told that, we'll walk through the rest of the stunts since you can't, and she felt like that was very, very disrespectful to her. And she was really upset. And I kind of forgot about that Dark Angel show. I'm trying to remember. I forget the actress who was on it, but I remember the show. In any event, it took 3 doctors to find out what was actually wrong with her. And she found out her neck was broken in 3 places. She had all types of floating bones in her body. And she thought her career was over, and she was really scared that her career might be over. And then she made a call to Stone Cold Steve Austin, who ended up getting her some surgery, and she had a 2-level fusion in her neck, and she had to take 15 months off. And then she says while she was out of action, she was, getting kind of antsy, trying to, as wrestlers tend to do when you're used to being on the move. You get some sleep for a little while, and then you start getting, okay, I got to do something. So then she started talking about volunteering at animal shelters. And she said she didn't watch wrestling while she was hurt because she didn't want to get bitter and she didn't want to get angry. And she said she got called to come back a year later. They called for her to come back in. And she asked for more time, and they gave her another 3 months. So then she was brought back in, and then she was brought back in with a lot of coddling. And she said this is when she started facing a lot of limitations of people telling her what she can and can't do. And she said that she would argue with them like, wrestling didn't hurt me. It wasn't the moonsaults or anything else that me on the injury reserve. It was, being on the TV set. But she had to work without all these limitations. And then she started talking about having the first ever women's cage match with Victoria. And I don't remember this at all. I don't think I was watching wrestling at the time. And to be quite honest, there's a lot of those Raws and SmackDowns from the very, very early Ruthless Aggression era. I don't think I actually sat down and watched all the way through. So she had a cage match with Victoria in 2003. And she said she felt like they had a great match and it was really impactful for women, even though she wasn't thinking about that at the time. But she thought that the match was really good, despite the fact that they had all these limitations put on them. And then she talked about her relationship with Trish Stratus, about them being the yin and yang from a fan perspective. And that, when they were wrestling each other, however, she felt like she was a better babyface. And letting Trish be the heel worked better. And then they had the quote first main event of Raw, which I'm thinking is the first advertised main event of Raw. And she kind of told the story of how that happened, that it was, a couple of days before a pay-per-view, and the stars were already had their storyline set up. And so the only thing they really hadn't done was figure out what the girls were going to do. So he gave the girls the main event because all the stars were kind of booked for the evening. And she says that she banged her neck in that match. That's when she took that Tope Suicide and basically folded herself in half. And basically says that, she wasn't hurt from that. She felt okay, even though, a lot of people think that she was hurt from that, but she wasn't. And she said there was a lot of pressure, and but she felt that it was a good pressure, and she felt like they could deliver, and felt like they did. And then she says that that little opportunities are what matter in the business, not the big push, but little moments here and there. And then she kind of folded that into how the main event of Raw happened. It's like, somebody could put you in that position, or it could be a thing where it just falls into your lap. And when that happens, you have to maximize your opportunities and maximize your minutes. And she felt like that's what she was, doing. And that's how she mentors others to tell them to maximize their time. So, Unforgiven 2006, this is, I believe, Trish Stratus' final match. And she says that it was good for them to have to end things there, and she knew she was going to be done 2 months later. So they got to do a really good match between the two of them. She also talked about her injury in 2005, where she blew out her ACL in a match with Trish Stratus. And she said this was the hardest injury she's had, which is worse than her neck, because an ACL injury, you have to actually do rehab. You don't do rehab on your neck. Basically, you just wait for the fusion to actually heal. But when it comes to the ACL, you have to, rebuild that muscle. And she talked about how hard that was. So that was interesting. And she also said she didn't finish that match. Then they got into some of the weird stuff that they had her doing in the early Ruthless Aggression era, or like her storyline with Kane, where, she says like through her relationship with Kane, which they didn't tell the entire story, which I think would have been really funny, because she basically says that, this was a weird storyline. And it was very weird. It was, hey, Kane steals her from Matt Hardy. And then she says that she's pregnant. And then she has an abortion. Then the whole thing with Snitsky occurs. It is absolutely, by God, absurd. And then that's when I realized, like, they did put Lita through the ringer. as far as a character, from a character perspective, they put her through a lot of shit in that '02 to '06 era. She went through a lot. And to be quite honest, that's probably why most people know her. It's because she went through so much shit during that era. But she talked about how, she became good friends with Kane during this era. And when she was asked to do the rated R marriage with Edge, she went out and found the grossest dress that she could possibly find because she felt like it fit the character. And she said that was basically her interpretation of her and Edge as characters, was to find something that was as gross and disgusting and sort of try to compete against each other to see who could be more over the top in terms of the sexualization of the two and the grossness of what they could do, because it was supposed to be very in your face. And of course we know that she sat on Twitch one time and said how uncomfortable she was during the live sex celebration. So take it with a grain of salt what she's saying in here. And I just kept that in my mind as she was talking about this whole thing with Edge. And she basically says that, working with Edge, period, was a stressful situation because the storyline caused her personal grief and, quote, got the wrong kind of heat. She also said that during this era, she had to learn how to work as a heel because she had never worked heel before. And I really had not considered that until she said it, that from when she debuted up until she was 5 or 6 straight years as a babyface. And really what turned her heel wasn't anything that she actually did on screen. What turned Lita heel was the shit she did off screen, so that was very interesting. I didn't really consider that until she said it. She had been a babyface this entire time, even as a damsel in distress and everything. So she said basically as they turned heel, her and Edge were instructed never to answer any questions about the whole thing with Matt Hardy. Don't talk about it. She said she didn't want to talk about it anyway. And they were basically just able to ride the momentum. And she said, and learning how to work heels, basically she just did the opposite of everything that she would normally do. So she says that she focused on her on work until it was retirement. And then when she says that when she was asked why she retired, she says that at the time in 2006, 30 felt old. And she basically said it was a contract year, and basically her passion was gone. She had been through a lot, with that storyline, and she was getting up there in age, and she figured she couldn't give 100% to the company anymore. So she gracefully bowed out. And she had been missing some special events like her friends having babies and her weddings and stuff like that. And so she moved to Nicaragua, which is probably the craziest thing I've ever heard. When she said she wanted to get away from everybody. This goes back to the whole independent streak. She wanted to do her own thing, so she moved to Nicaragua when nobody knew her so that she could free her mind. And she really only came back to the WWE because in 2014 she was asked to be in the Hall of Fame and Trish Stratus to induct her. And she says at that time she had a chance to really reflect on her career. And then they talked about her legacy, about, how it doesn't feel that long ago that she was, in the ring and traveling and doing all this stuff. But now she feels more at peace with her legacy than she used to. And looking at the roster, how many people says that, they got into the business because of her. And that was great for her. That's basically how she, comes to peace with her career now. And she said she started some animal rescue programs and some poverty programs in Nicaragua. And that's basically what she does when she's not involved in wrestling. And I was floored by her moving to Nicaragua, of all places. But I like the story. Obviously there are some holes there where you kind of be like, But, the idea of living a point and shoot lifestyle, I've heard a lot of people say that, basically that's how they get by. There's quite a few people who, some folks say, I want to do this, and they try to plan it. And then they say, oh, I need X amount of money. I need X amount of time to do it. And they never get around to it. And Lita's just kind of like, point and shoot. I want to go be a wrestler. Rey Mysterio is my favorite wrestler. He's Mexican. I'm going to go to Mexico. And she's like, it didn't even occur to her to try to find a wrestling school in Florida. She just thought that, I want to be like him. He's Mexican, even though he's from California. She didn't know that either. But I like that, because that is the kind of lifestyle that you would think people who, if they really want to succeed at something, that's the kind of lifestyle they would have to live. Sometimes people get in this idea, and I know this because I talked to my grandparents when they were alive. I have no living grandparents anymore. But I remember my granddad, he's from Alabama, I think. And he packed up and moved to Detroit. And you would be like, why did you move to Detroit? And you basically like, I couldn't find a job where I lived. I just, you got to get up and move. And some people have that mentality. And I know in the United States, we kind of try to beat that out of people. That, the idea of leaving where you are from to go where you need to be. The only people who seem to do that are people who want to be in Hollywood. Like the only people who get up and leave town are the people who want to be actors and actresses and stuff like that. Most people don't leave where they came from, or they get stuck in the various stages of what am I going to do? How am I going to take care of myself? She's basically just winged it. It's basically like, I figure it out when I get there. I figure it out when I, and that's reckless. It's very reckless, but at the same time, it's ballsy, especially for a young lady, to go and just be on your own. And hey, I'm going to jump in this car and drive to this town. And, maybe I'll get this job. Maybe I won't. I know it's easier for women, especially during that time. And I know some people are going to be like, it's easy for women. Like, yeah, look at Lita, how she dressed. She was a young, hot young lady. Of course, there was going to be a lot of wrestling promotions, especially in the 90s, that was going to be willing to book her. Even today, they would do it because there's still an audience for young, hot women, and if she can't really work, they'll figure it out, but if she wants to be a valet, she could do that. Tons of things. She was just, allowed herself to be open to opportunities and to be open to new experiences and to just be out there. It's one of those things where if you listen to her story, you learn that a lot of it is putting yourself in the right position and then opening yourself up to the opportunities. And that's a pretty good story. Again, you could probably raise your eyebrow here and there, but I really enjoyed listening to Lita talk. And I hadn't really considered her story before, so it was pretty good. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace.